Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Farah from USGBC LA. I wanted to just take a second and thank you all for joining us. We're really excited to be getting a little bit more information about embodied carbon modeling and the different tools that we measure this. They have created an amazing tool and application that you can use with this, which is like mind-boggling to me. So I'm really excited that they're able to share their wealth of knowledge with you guys. So we've got Kate and Terry on the line so far, and we're hoping to get Stacy on as well in a second. And I'm going to go ahead and pass the torch over. Oh, perfect. Hi, Kate. Or Stacy, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Awesome. Okay. So we've got everybody on the line, and I'm going to go ahead and pass this off to Kate as soon as I can stop my sharing. And Kate, I'll let you take over. Thank you so much.
Great. Hello, and really happy to be here today. So I'm going to be kicking off with an introduction to how building materials and embodied carbon fit together with California's Buy Clean policy. I'm an architect and an engineer and a faculty member at the University of Washington, and I head up the Carbon Leadership Forum. And the Carbon Leadership Forum has a goal to figure out how to radically reduce and ultimately eliminate the emissions from building material manufacturing and construction or embodied carbon. We conduct research, develop resources, convene an international network, and incubate initiatives all in order to support that mission. And the Embodied Carbon in Construction Calculator is one of those initiatives you'll hear about later today. And some of the research and resources we've developed are directly related to Buy Clean policy. We're supported by a broad cross-section of the industry who share this goal of radical building sector decarbonization. So if we look big picture on why we're doing this, we're interested in solving global climate challenges. In order to meet the target set by the Paris Climate Agreement, we need to get to zero by 2050 or before, and a reduction of 50% or more in the next 10 years. So, the longer we take to act, the faster we have to make that reduction. It's the total carbon emissions over time. And so as we've waited longer and longer, the need for rapid decarbonization increases. And simultaneously, as architects and engineers and builders and building owners, when we look at our contributions to global greenhouse gas emissions on the pie chart on the right, the sort of teal pie chart chunk is from operating buildings, but the yellow is representing our estimates of the impacts related to building materials. The 11% there on the side is from major materials like cement, glass, aluminum, and steel, but all of the other building materials by mass add up from interior finishes to furniture and all of mechanical systems. So all of those come together can be as much as 50% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So both we have an urgency to act, and as a building sector, we have a responsibility to be driving that action in terms of how we consume. When you look at California as a state has had a really interesting things happened over the last decade or so, in which while growth of GDP and population has been increasing, the greenhouse gas emissions are decreasing. So both per capita and per GDP and as a whole, they are going down. But the way this carbon accounting is that's capturing the emissions that take place in California from manufacturing and electricity generation directly there in California. They're not including the emissions from the goods that were purchased outside of state. So it's sometimes called the carbon loophole because in order to get to zero, really, we need to account for all of the things that we are responsible for. And so if we outsource our manufacturing, you might be able to drive down your statewide or national-wide emissions to zero. But if they just are outsourcing those emissions to somewhere else, we're not getting the global impact that we need. So Buy Clean policy is looking to address this gap in terms of how the state can try to incentivize lower carbon material manufacturing. So as I mentioned, the carbon buckets for buildings can be grouped down to embodied carbon and operating carbon. So operating carbon, energy to heat and cool and operate a building, that's energy efficiency and the things that we really have been focusing on in terms of operating energy, energy use intensity and things like that. Embodied carbon, we're kind of calling the new frontier because we haven't been paying as much attention to the impacts of building material manufacturing. That is the emissions from a factory, it's emissions from electricity and fuels that are taking place, it's transporting and building materials, and all the way through to taking them apart and end of life. So if we're looking at the material impacts, they fall under the embodied carbon bucket, and the operating impacts under the operating bucket. And while if we look over a long lifespan of a regular performing building, the operating impacts will be more. If we look at a near-term time frame between now and 2050, and for buildings that are energy efficient, the embodied impacts can be as much as half or more of the total impacts in that time frame. So if we're looking at that urgency of acting now, we cannot just sort of wait and address the material manufacturing impacts later. We have to address these emissions that happen upfront before the building is built. And additionally, decarbonizing industrial sectors can be challenging. It's not like a steel mill is polluting because they want to. It uses a lot of energy and to make steel or other building materials. So in order to provide a market pull to invest in low carbon manufacturing facilities and manufacturing processes, the theory of buy clean is about purchasing lower carbon materials and prioritizing the purchase of those to incentivize investments in low carbon manufacturing. When we're looking to estimate the environmental impact of buildings, embodied carbon of buildings, there's really two parts. One is how many materials you use, and then the carbon intensity of those materials. And you can wrap that up at a whole building scale. And when you're looking to reduce embodied carbon, there's multiple different levers and strategies that you can take place. So one strategy is optimizing the project. That would be using an existing building and retrofitting it rather than building a new one, or building a smaller building. So you can have a lower carbon footprint home if you build a 1,000 square foot home than if you build a 10,000 square foot home. Or so you build less, you will have a lower embodied carbon. You can also optimize the system. That's where you might trade out between a wood or a concrete structural system, or a glazed wall assembly versus a wall built up out of a panelized materials. And so there you can evaluate it using life cycle assessments as a method that compares across the entire life cycle. And you have to address things like operating performance and end-of-life impacts. Buy clean and environmental product declarations are in the section around optimizing procurement. So what do you want to specify and actually buy when you know that you're going to buy a type of material? So I know I'm going to buy some concrete for my foundation. How do I get the lowest carbon concrete, or the lowest carbon steel, or glass, or insulation, or carpet, etc.? So these procurement methods are typically using environmental product declarations. Environmental product declarations are a third-party verified report of the emissions estimated in manufacturing a product. In this example here, we have concrete, and instead of having a serving size of 2/3 of a cup, we have a cubic meter or cubic yard of concrete. Instead of measuring carbohydrates, we measure climate change or greenhouse gas emissions, as well as other environmental impacts. I like to say that although the nutrition label, resonates really well because there's lots of different things that are getting tracked, environmental product declarations, or EPDs, are more like miles per gallon on the car. They are a modeled approximation of what we would expect, and there is definitely variability and uncertainty within them. There are standards that are developed called product category rules, or PCRs, that guide how to do that calculation. And so we know there's variability. However, they are directionally accurate. So if I want to compare two concretes, if I look in here, it looks like this says 445. The carbon footprint of this concrete is 445. If there was another one that would say that was 446, they're pretty much the same. But if one is 445 and the other is 900, the 445 is going to be directionally accurate, just like when you get the miles per gallon on a car. So again, Buy Clean policy is around picking the lower carbon footprint material within a product category and using state purchasing power to recognize that. So Buy Clean for California is saying that products that are purchased for state projects need to comply with this to drive towards purchasing lower carbon or cleaner products. So in this example, there are 3 different rebars made in different manufacturing methods, and you can see that there can be a carbon footprint that might range from as high as 5 or 6 kilograms per of CO2 per kilogram of material to as low as below 1. So there's a range. They are functionally equivalent steels, but the emissions that took place in manufacturing them are different. This is not to compare between materials, so this is not where you could say that steel is better than concrete or vice versa. So California passed Buy Clean policy into law in October of 2017. The law is going through, let's see, I'll just start a couple of things. First, California's Buy Clean policy identified 4 main material categories, from structural steel rebar, flat glass, and mineral board insulation. And they are using environmental product declarations as their disclosure standard, and they're setting a performance of a maximum global warming potential value in which at a future date, in about a year or so, California will set a rate, and they will only allow purchasing of materials below that rate. There are other states that have considered Buy Clean policy, in particular Washington State, but others as well are in the process of considering them. And so, the one thing is which materials are being considered. So in Washington, all structural materials were considered. And then they typically are falling on EPDs and then whether or not they have a performance metric that they're measuring against. So California both has a disclosure and a performance standard. But right now here, after January 2020, California is requiring environmental product declarations for all state projects from this date on for those material categories. And in early 2021, they will publish a maximum global warming potential. And after July of 2021, there will be a standard cap in place in which, unless certain limitations are met, you will not be able to purchase materials that have a higher carbon footprint than the cap set by California. So you can learn more. I was going to put the link, but it was really long, so you can just Google California DGS Buy Clean, and you'll get the DGS website that has information. They have an FAQ section. I pulled out some things from that just identified which products that they're asking for and what facility they're looking for. So they're looking for product-specific data for these materials, and they're considering, for example, for steel, they want the steel mill facility-specific data, not the fabricator of the steel. So you can learn more about that on the DGS website. In 2017, it was difficult to find environmental product declarations, let alone sort them. That led to the need to have a database of the EPDs and the conception of the Embodied Carbon Construction Calculator, or EC3 tool. Before I hand it over to Stacy, I just want to give a little bit of well, I guess, Stacy, you want me to do this now, or should I pass it on to you and we come back to this?
I think it's fine to do it now, just so they'll understand what they're seeing when we get into the material searches.
Okay. So, one of the roles of the Carbon Leadership Forum on this project is to help standardize the interpretation of the data. And one of the great things about how the EC3 tool team has brought together is really visualization of data that was previously sort of buried in complex PDFs. So when you look at the data in the EC3 tool, you'll see a range of the product categories. These are all the results in the product category. And the little green bar is showing the products, the 80th percentile and the 20th percentile. So 20% of the products are higher than this and 20% are below. So 60% of the products are in this zone here. And if you look at the EPD itself, I'll go here. So then we're setting a high baseline. It's a conservative estimate of the highest amount of data within a product category. And then the product itself, the EPD results is this little black line. And then we apply an estimate of the variation or uncertainty within that EPD. And so we're defaulting to the high estimate. So we're kind of, rather knowing that there's variability, we're using what we call the burden of the doubt approach, meaning we don't give the benefit of the doubt, assuming they're average. We assume that they're the high end of what the average might be. And so California is going to set a limit that's going to be less than our high number, but reflecting something close to an industry average data. So California will set that, and then you'd be able to identify if products are above or below that, and they're able to comply. So the EC3 project is super exciting. It brought together over 50 industry sponsors from multiple trade organizations, from owners to architects to builders, manufacturers. And the EC3 tool was incubated at the Carbon Leadership Forum, but it has been launched, it has been hatched, or however you want to put it, to a new nonprofit, Building Transparency, and Stacy is heading that up. So I'm going to hand it over to her and stop the share.
Great, thanks. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see here. Everyone see my screen?
Yep. Yes, we can.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Stacy Smedley. As Kate mentioned, I'm currently acting as Executive Director of Building Transparency, which is now the nonprofit that's managing and continuing to scale the EC3 tool. I just wanted to start with the website. So if anyone hasn't gotten their user login yet, all you need to do is go to buildingtransparency.org and click on register for free. The tool is free and open access. So once you click on that, you'll put in your name and email address, and it will get you a login in about 5 or 10 minutes. So anyone who hasn't done that should go do that, and you'll have access to exactly what I'm going to show you as we get into the tool. So this is the home screen. Once you've logged in, there are a few things that you're going to see. The first thing to just recognize is this data around how many EPDs we have in the tool. The public version at launch last November includes 9 material categories. That includes the categories that are there for Buy Clean, California. And this is just showing you the number of EPDs we have per category. So there are product-specific EPDs, and there are also industry average EPDs. We want to make sure we show both. And this is constantly updating. So every day as we get more EPDs into the database, this increases. We are working on more material categories right now. So there'll be more public categories launched this year as we work through the methodology and ensure we get the baseline set for those. So I really want to show today just how the tool can support Buy Clean California, and you'll kind of see how the search and sort works for anything based on that. So the tool really has two key features for users, find and compare materials and plan and compare buildings. If you click on the find and compare materials category, you're going to see here that we've got all of those 9 material categories broken down into subsets. I'm not going to do concrete, which is what I typically start with. I'm going to go to rebar, since that's one of the things that Buy Clean California is tracking. If you click on rebar, what you're going to see here is this design intent function with things that you would want to be able to potentially search or sort by for rebar. One of the categories right here is compliance. So if you click that right now, what you're going to see is there is a Buy Clean California 2020 compliance filter. And if you simply sort by that filter and then click search, what's going to happen is EC3 is only going to return to you the EPDs that meet the requirements that Kate shared when it comes to PCR and facility specific and all those things. So if you scroll down, you'll see first that we have 13 product specific EPDs that are meeting the Buy Clean California requirements, which means for this year, if you selected one of these suppliers and plants, you would be able to show compliance. Other things it's showing you right here, if we click on details, it's going to pop up that graph that Kate showed you, where you can see your selected EPD, the search range of what got returned, and then where the CLF baseline has been established. Once Buy Clean California sets limits, you would also be able to see the Buy Clean California limit and understand if the EPD that you selected was below that limit. So that will be coming when those limits are set by the state of California. Up above here is also the box plot that Kate mentioned. So here's, again, for the data search that you did, the conservative and achievable and the CLF baseline. So you'll be able to see that in a snapshot for any search that you do. This appears over in the right-hand corner. The other thing that's really one of the compelling things about the tool when it comes to making choices, even once you know you're all compliant, is really understanding where the manufacturers or suppliers are against each other to potentially procure from the lowest option if possible. So this is how someone like my contract construction company, Skanska, where I am the director of sustainability, if we're looking at bid documents or procurement language or bids, and we get a bid from Nucor versus Cascade Steel, you know, if they were comparable in price, or even if Nucor was a little more, we want to procure from Nucor based on the fact that they are the lowest emitter. So again, we're also right now adding in the CLF baseline line to this chart. So coming soon in the next few weeks, that CLF baseline will appear here too. And again, once the Buy Clean California limit gets set, it could also appear. So you would see again, which of the suppliers and manufacturers meet your criteria. You can also do this at the plant level. So if I actually filter by Gerdau to get to just a Gerdau's EPD, and then I want to compare their plants, since they are facility-specific EPDs, you can start to look and understand what the lowest plant might be for Gerdau, and how you would want to actually procure from the lowest plant if possible. I'm going to do this one more time for the mineral wool insulation. So again, I've clicked on insulation. It's kept that compliance filter there for me. I'll go to insulating material and pick mineral wool. I'll click the button. And again, for this category, it's going to show you which EPDs are compliant to that facility specific level. So right now, you know, there might be some searches in under steel or something where there may be very few EPDs that actually meet the requirements of Buy Clean. The tool is simply going to show you that. So I think one of the things that policies like this are trying to push is to get more suppliers and manufacturers across material categories to go to that facility specific EPD, so the data is more accurate and transparent back to the actual production of the material. The other thing I just wanted to show you as kind of a future state is how the plan and compare buildings function works. So I'm going to open up Chuck's Lair, which is my 8-year-old son's EC3 project that he did as one of his assignments a month ago. I'm trying to figure out creative ways to teach him things. And so what you'll see here is at a project level, this is something that we're thinking about in terms of being able to benchmark this data or use it at a project specific level of tracking. You can create a project and put in your location. And then what's going to happen down here is you're seeing that there's actually the materials that you used, the quantities of materials that you used on the project. And then right from here, you can go and do those same searches. So if you were doing a project that was trying to meet Buy Clean California compliance, you could come in here and just input the quantities of materials that you wanted for those categories, for instance, or your whole building, and be able to go into the search function, do the search, and then actually select the EPD you're using. So this is where you actually just go down here and pick one, and it shows you selected it. The cool thing about that when it comes to potential compliance reporting is that we now have this selected versus baseline function, where if you click that, you're going to see right now the CLF baseline for your whole building based on the quantities that you put in versus that realized savings at the 20th percentile versus what you actually did. So this is showing the reduction that you realized by picking the EPDs that you picked and using them in your project, then breaks it down for each category so you can see what your reductions were. We could potentially have this be the Buy Clean California limit for those 4 categories. In other Buy Clean policy, if they were doing just structural materials, we could do that too. But again, just different ways to view the data all the way to the point where you've actually made the selection for your project so you can realize the savings. I think with that, I'm going to stop because I really just wanted to focus on how this is working for Buy Clean California. If we have time at the end, I think we were thinking I could do more of a demo or Q&A inside the tool if there are questions about anything to do with EC3. But with that, I think I'll hand it back over to Terry and Kate.
Thanks, Stacy. This is Terry. And that was a very cool view. You guys are always adding new functionality that's very cool and easy to use.
You don't want to get boring, Terry. You've got to keep on adding stuff that helps people.
Exactly. That's right. That's the beauty of SaaS in the cloud. You can always keep doing stuff. Okay, I'm going to turn on my video and say hi to everyone. Because I can't see who's there, I'm going to assume that the audience is a mix of building product manufacturers and architects, engineers, and contractors, because I'm going to tell this story, and there's a narrative to each of you, because it's a virtuous cycle of supply and demand. We're going to drill into those narratives for each audience a little bit to talk about who's doing what in the design of products, and then ultimately the specification and procurement of those products. So let me just share my screen. Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I like to start out by setting my own baseline of understanding, which is product transparency and environmental performance, also known as environmental impact, is all about performance. It's just the latest performance criteria that's come into the realm of consideration when and performance, environmental performance, and health are part of the definition. So if you're to create a high performance building, then environmental and also material ingredient disclosures going to be the way that you're going to be able to get insight into the actual performance of those products to be able to make decisions about selection specification. But what I really want to point out is that the EPD is the end state of doing the evaluation of the environmental performance of a product. It starts out with doing a life cycle assessment, and the life cycle assessment is actually that technical study, that detailed technical study that the manufacturer spends a lot of time, a lot of expense. And there's a fair amount of risk involved in terms of gathering data from different facilities and from the supply chain. But the purpose to do it, the primary purpose, is for that manufacturer themselves to gain insights about what's contributing to the environmental impacts or the environmental performance of their products across the life cycle of the products, and then be able to, from those insights, be able to drive that information back into their product development process to reduce the impacts in each life cycle stage and ultimately improve the environmental performance. Then and only then should a manufacturer decide, do I want to create an EPD? Because frankly, an EPD is not an indicator of whether a product is, I'm using air quotes, green or not. It's simply a disclosure that reports the amount of impacts in each impact category, of which embodied carbon or global warming potential is only one impact category that's evaluated. So it's not an indicator of the relative greenness, and that's been a problem for regular people who want to select higher performing products, that EPDs are really hard to use if you're not an LCA expert to interpret the data that's reported and actually make decisions about higher performing products. So the fact is that we've moved past this idea of a checklist for LEED version 4 and other green building rating systems. Really it's not enough anymore to just pick a product that has an EPD to get your quota, to get the credit. What really matters now is performance, and the ability to understand the performance that's being reported is mission critical. Because if we're really going to reduce the impact on the built environment, as Kate pointed out in the beginning of her presentation, just having an EPD isn't enough. Actually having a higher performing product is what we're striving for. And further, this notion and the challenge of continuous improvement is real. And so only by manufacturers truly understanding what's causing those impacts, where in the life cycle, to which impact categories, can they make important and meaningful improvements. And that's why the EC3 tool is super valuable, because it's taking that data from that end state, from that EPD, and putting it into a format that is actionable, where you actually can take that information and make comparative performance decisions to select and specify products that have lower embodied carbon impacts. But just as an aside, the EC3 tool is looking only at embodied carbon and not all the other impact categories that are reported in an LCA and an EPD. But this is a crucial one to start with, as Kate pointed out, and that's where people are focused. So we've got two constituencies in this process of wanting to understand environmental performance information. Architects, engineers, contractors, and owners want and need to design and build lower embodied carbon buildings, and manufacturers want and need to actually make lower embodied carbon products. Because it's a performance metric, they want to be able to compete, just like every other performance metric that they compete on all day long, in addition to price, availability, safety, functional performance, all those things, aesthetics. This is just another performance criteria, and there's still a lot of uncertainty about, well, how do we compete on this metric, and is it really viable, and do we want to compete on this metric? And further, all the manufacturers who are participating in this webinar today, it's going to be pretty important that all of your reps, all your customer-facing people, your distributors, are conversant about being able to talk about environmental performance as one of the performance metrics that they need to be able to represent about your products. Because ultimately, you want to get your products specified and then procured, which the EC3 tool is a procurement tool. It's the only way you're going to win more business. So a little bit about Sustainable Minds. I'm the CEO and founder. I started the company a pretty long time ago already, but our mission has never changed. As a software company using digital technologies to help product manufacturers of all kinds, not just building product manufacturers, to operationalize environmental performance into their product development processes and to motivate them to do it because it's going to drive revenue and growth through creating greener and higher performing products. That is the incentive, is to drive revenue and growth because you're making higher performing products. So because we've been in this business for a while, when LEED version 4 came around and was introduced in 2012, we said, well, we already have been working on how to simplify delivering LCA tools to manufacturers to create higher performing products. Let's work on helping product manufacturers report the environmental performance of those products in a simple, accessible way so that they can actually get rewarded for taking matters into their own hands and actually improving the environmental performance of their products. In 2014, we became an EPD program operator, which is prescribed by ISO 14025. Organizations that set up a Type 3 environmental declaration program have to run it a certain way to create product category rules according to global standards and produce, we call them EPDs, they're actually Type 3 environmental declarations, again, according to global standards. So what we did was we took on trying to better standardize and simplify the creation of those upfront rules that would make it simpler, more cost-effective, and more participatory for product manufacturers to create those rules, and then to be able to standardize and simplify the creation of the environmental product declarations, ultimately so that they can be compared in the format that they're delivered in, and people can extract understandable and meaningful information. We also deliver LCA and material evaluation services. If we weren't actually delivering those technical services, I don't think we'd have the knowledge to be a program operator and be innovating in this space. And same thing, we launched the Transparency Catalog in 2016 to shine a light on all of the building product manufacturers investing in product transparency, either EPDs or material ingredient disclosures. And again, could not have had and could not continue to have the capability and the knowledge to continue to build out a platform that is really easy to use, simple, but supports our mission to help those product manufacturers who really are making higher performing products get their brands found, get those products found, and make it easy to access the technical information and to make comparative decisions so those products can be selected and specified. I realize this is an old screen capture. This is the transparency catalog. We too have every EPD from every program operator in North America available through the transparency catalog. This actually is now 24 master format divisions. So that number keeps going up. And our intent with the transparency catalog is really ultimately to help revolutionize green building product selection and specification to grow revenue and brand value for building product manufacturers. And the way we're doing it is to radically simplify the delivery of the product transparency information, make manufacturers and their products findable using the standard master format aligned with master spec, the specification paradigm that people are familiar with, and really make it just fast and easy and compress the amount of time that it's traditionally taken to do the kind of research to find just those products from just those manufacturers, to compress it literally down to seconds, to again help the selection, but also the specification process to find manufacturers with equivalent products to be included in those specs. And the benefit is that you're going to specify those manufacturers' products, and we're going to make sure that they actually get into the project, they get procured, to make sure those manufacturers' investments pay off. Because if those products don't get procured at the end of the day, it's possible manufacturers will stop being transparent because there will no longer be the incentive. If they're spending all the time and money and effort and risk to do the work, if they're not seeing that pay off, even though the market has asked for it, if the market isn't acting on that demand, then it's possible this thing that is driving continuous improvement and competition, it'll go away and there won't be improvement in competition. So when we were working on evolving the transparency catalog, and we too are continually adding new functionality and new content because you can when things are in the cloud, the transparency catalog is really the only platform, which by the way is also free to use, as Stacy pointed out, is the EC3 tool. There's also no login. You don't have to set up an account. Anybody can come use it. You don't have to worry about sharing confidential information. We don't track people. It really is there for anybody to use, both building product manufacturers and building professionals. And so we realized, because there are 9 or 10 program operators creating EPDs for products in North America, and there are many more program operators in Europe who are creating global EPDs that apply to products that are sold in North America, that there really did need to be, a single resource for people who do want to select and specify products with environmental product disclosures, environmental product declarations, that needed to be created. But also because we have been in the business of delivering digital tools in the cloud, the challenge with EPDs today is that all of them, other than the ones from Sustainable Minds, are delivered in PDFs. PDFs aren't digital. And that's one of the challenges that the folks at the EC3 tool have been taking on, trying to digitize and standardize the data that they're acquiring. But ultimately, that was the point for us, the reason why we became an aggregator of environmental product declarations, is so that there could be a single place and that people will ultimately apply their own selection criteria, but let's get everything in one place as we continue down the road of digitizing that data, and keeping in mind that any or all of the tools that get created along this decision tree of selection, specification, procurement have to easily work into current workflows and not make people do things they hadn't done before. So I think at this point I've probably said everything I'd want to say about this slide, but it is critically important to specify products from manufacturers who have created EPDs. And today there's manufacturers with thousands of products across 23 master format sections, which is pretty much all of the major sections that you're going to use in doing a typical building. So really, you actually can pretty much design a whole project using products that have EPDs, and many or most of them also will have material ingredient disclosures too, and that is how you drive change. So the partnership with the Transparency Catalog and the EC3 tool was a natural. We both have the same mission and goal, which is to select and procure products with better environmental performance, and specifically now embodied carbon. And so what we've done is integrated their work with our work to continue to make it super easy to apply the decisions that you wanted to apply to your process, and really not have to do a lot of work to apply those different criteria. So really the Transparency Catalog is helping to serve as kind of a last mile for manufacturers in the EC3 tool. So once you've done the selection and the modeling that Stacy has shown, and frankly, it's super cool to see the building comparisons as well as just the material comparisons. But once you find a manufacturer and a product you like, you're going to be able to go right to the Transparency Catalog and learn more about that manufacturer, contact that manufacturer, find out more about their products, and get a whole bunch more information. And so this is just a quick collage of screenshots that there's multiple ways to get from the EC3 tool to the Transparency Catalog and back. Or if you've come to the Transparency Catalog first, then into the EC3 tool to start modeling. And I'm going to show you how that works. So here's an example. Here's USG. USG is also one of the EC3 tool partners. And this is their listing page in the Transparency Catalog. They've got a bunch of social media tools. I'm not going to talk about all that stuff now. I'm going to really focus on the product table, which is a matrix where the horizontal axis is the master format section that the manufacturer has products in. And we append the manufacturer's brand name so that people know what this manufacturer calls their products in that master format section. We also, which is new, have been adding all the three-part specs for that section from that manufacturer. So this is the manufacturer's three-part spec or their guide spec. So actually, if all anybody wants is to come to the Transparency Catalog and find products from a manufacturer in a particular section and get the spec, you just click and you download the spec, and there you are. The vertical axis is the name of the product, which you'll see this, when I click this link, it's going to take the user to the product page in the manufacturer's website, which should be the single source of truth. We don't believe that manufacturers should have to manage a lot of content about their products someplace that isn't their website. So that's going to go to the manufacturer's website. And in a glance, you're going to be able to see which types of transparency disclosures, whether they have environmental performance disclosures, which is an EPD, and which types, if any, material ingredient disclosures they have. What we've tried to do is bring some of the information, the results from the disclosure, into the surface of the listing, so that yes, you will be able to drill in, get the declare label, get the HPD, get the EPD, but you're also going to get information about those results. So about the EPD, you're going to know that it's cradle to gate, it's North American in regionality. You can see that it's valid through 2013. They've got a red list free declare label. They've got a 2.1 HPD. You can see it's red list free. You can also tell, for those of you who know about HPDs, that it's LEED v4 compliant in its disclosure. And then coming back over here is the cool part, where now we've been able to add essentially the carbon footprint, the embodied carbon footprint report from this EPD, which is now in the EC3 tool. And in a glance, you'll be able to see, or you can see now, this is live, that this particular product from this manufacturer is in the 20th percentile of all other EPDs in the EC3 tool, which are all EPDs. And you'll be able to say, well, if I want to use embodied carbon as a selection and specification indicator, that's really important to know. And I'll show you in a moment how this is all live, and you can go right into the EC3 tool to start to model. But what we want to do is actually help people learn while they do, because nobody has much time to learn separately from doing. And so what we did is we worked with Kate and Phil, the developer of the EC3 tool, to really try to distill the story of the EC3 methodology into a handy tooltip. And so when you mouse over any of these tooltips, any of these question marks, you're going to get this tooltip that explains what the EC3 tool is, how the methodology works, the quintile results, and you also saw Kate show this comparative diagram of what's been reported relative to the industry average. There's the CLF baseline, and when the BiClean baseline gets added, we'll add that to the diagram too. And so you're able to see that that link and that quintile takes you right to the EC3 tool page, and you're seeing that comparison right there, showing that it's the 20th percentile. And when you use the master format filtering functionality in the EC3 tool, again, I'll show you that in a second, you're able to go into any master format division, select a section or not. You can look across the entire division. You can search by brand. But now what you're going to be able to do as we add the BiClean capability, and we're currently working with the California DGS and EC3 and the master spec folks to identify all of the master format sections that would fall under the BiClean program. We will add a BiClean filter to our rating systems filter, and at the end of the day, the results that you're going to get in the EC3 tool and the results that you're going to get in the transparency catalog will be the same. The same products, the same EPDs that are eligible for BiClean. And so when you come in, so here I'm showing you an example of Division 8. Here's 0880 glazing, but there's other sections where EPDs made from the same PCR and will fall under BiClean. What you'll be able to do is there will be a filter added here, a checkbox. You'll click the BiClean filter, and every product with that is conformant with or eligible for BiClean will simply show up in the results. So it'll be that easy. We've already done the work for you, and you'll also be able to see the EC3 tool quintiles. We're always welcoming demos, whether you're a manufacturer or a architect, engineer, contractor. We do demos, contact us. There's a link right there. And just quickly showing you how that works live.
Hey, Terry.
Yeah.
We only have about 7 minutes or 6 minutes, and there's a ton of questions that I think
Oh, then
want to make
let's
sure we
go
answer.
right to those questions. Yes.
Is that okay? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we get them because there's some good ones.
Good. Then let's go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Stacy, are you going to just go and dive into
so
them? I feel like you should open up the tool.
I am. So Kate, they're going to read the questions. The USGBC folks are going to read the questions, and I'm going to answer them with the tool open.
Great.
yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. Okay, so the first one we have is, does the EC3 database also allow you to compare products overall to, for example, choose the best insulation from an embodied carbon standpoint?
I love it when I can answer a question with the actual example. So if you go into if you go into insulation right now, you'll notice that if you do the search just of all insulation, this is only in a material category. So we don't want you to use EC3 to compare, timber to steel or ceiling panels to gypsum board, because that's really not comparable with how EPDs work with individual PCRs for categories. But within a category, if we just search all insulation, you'll see over here at this level, just like we can compare manufacturers, we can compare types of insulation. So if you click that, what you're going to see is there's board, blanket, and insulation category, blown, sprayed, and you'll see here that board goes all the way from 12.4 down to a very small number. So I'm just going to show you what the tool allows you to do. So if you see something like this, you're like, I wonder why that is. You can then go and search by board and say, okay, I want to see what the high and the low is and why that is. So if you search all board, you can then actually come down here and filter by high to low and see that those high ones in the board category seem to be XPS. So yes, absolutely, the tool is meant to help you understand differences within a material category of your choices and let you dig into that information to start to understand why that might be and what those products are that are higher or lower.
Awesome, thank you. How do your calculations compare to the ones from Greenhouse Gas Protocol?
So we are, I don't know the answer to that question explicitly. What I can say is that EC3 is looking very particularly at stage A1 to A3 embodied carbon emissions of building materials. And we're using the standards that are set by PCRs and ISO, in the EPDs to get to those emissions numbers.
And I'll just add into that, the broader difference is a lot of the corporate carbon accounting at that scale they're just using different types of data and different, slightly different methods. So they're both directionally accurate. They're not necessarily directly comparable.
Thanks, Kate.
Great. How does the EC3 tool adjust carbon calculations based on location? Also, are options for automatic import only available for BIM 360 and not yet for Revit desktop?
Yes, so the first question, I think that's probably to do with transport of materials from a plant to a site. We currently are not tracking that, largely because it's such a small impact compared to the emissions of the manufacturing phases, stage A1 to A3. We do have, if you do a project, it does geocode the project to your address. So the functionality to add that in is there. We just really want to tackle that A1 to A3 stage first, because that's where about 95% of the emissions typically are.
I will note, though, Stacy, that if you do a manufacturer and facility specific EPD, it accounts for the regional power grid and all of the regional fuel.
Yeah,
conditions.
so within the EPD itself, it is accounting for that. Yeah, I think I was just interpreting the question as potentially the transportation emission side of things.
Awesome. How is the product baseline defined by EC3?
I will show you how to find that. So Kate, I don't know if you want to explain it, but I'm just going to go in here and say that, if you go in here and do a search and the baseline appears, people don't realize this normally, but if you just click on this little CLF baseline line, it will open up the actual document. So this is the document that Kate's team created that actually outlines the methodology for setting them and then gives you the table that shows you exactly what they're based on. Kate, do you want to add anything right now, or
That's
just?
super cool.
Well, when I teach about how standards are set, like what's the live load capacity of a office and sorts of things, I talk about how a bunch of men in the 1950s got together with cigars and debated these things. So this team, it's a multi-gendered discussion, but in the end, these are estimates of high numbers because we don't have all the data available. So what the Carbon Leadership Forum is doing is, because we had industry average data, but we didn't have high, we're putting together a best estimate with sort of 1 to 2 significant figures of about what's the range within product categories to start to help people understand what's possible.
And then also I would say that from our side of things as a user that has been on the architecture and construction side, we were trying to do something that was similar to energy code baselines or energy baselines, where it's a number that's a static number that's high enough for folks to either set it as a maximum baseline number or to set reductions against it in code language. So what has been missing in embodied carbon and LCA generally is a standard kind of starting point where folks across ownership or even within a firm could start to look at the reductions comparatively on projects. So EC3 is really trying to set that number that you can compare against as a high baseline and then look at reductions. And
you can see here the thing that Stacy pulled up, we've also given an estimate of an average and a low. So that what the state of California is saying is they're going to set a definition of what average is. And they're, they might use a slightly different methodology or assumptions to come to an average number. So these are because we don't have all the data that we might know, these are estimates, not.
We're doing the best we can with what we know. That's how I would put it.
That makes sense. We're right at time right now, but I think we have room for one more. Are you guys all on a time schedule?
I can stay on and answer them. I think there are some good ones if folks want to stay on and listen to the answers.
There's a lot of really good. Yeah, so how can the EC3 compare embodied carbon for different facade types like rain screens, i.e. metal panels, fiber cement, timber, stone, etc.?
So right now, cladding is a pilot category, so it's not a public category, but just like I did for the insulation categories, when cladding gets pushed out, whenever that is, when we have the funding from that category, you'd be able to do the same thing over here where you could compare types. You can see here, if I click this, we've got, AEP span metal panels versus Parklex versus blah, blah, blah. So that is in there on the pilot function. That's the kind of pre-release function available for pilot users. And that would be something you could do for a category like cladding at some point, potentially.
That's awesome. Does the EC3 database also give the option for the performance metric of not, quote unquote, using a product at all for that particular solution? For instance, low carbon paint versus no paint at all.
So that is more of, we didn't share the slide, but Kate kind of mentioned this too, where you make, that's in like the early design choice where you're looking at things from a project level. So it's using this versus not using this. And EC3 is really the next step once you know what you're using to drive low carbon options so that manufacturers start to create low carbon products. So it's really more in that kind of LCA, right sizing your project stage, not an EC3 function.
So the last part of that question was, they're curious if products that inspire behavior are also measured for their positive or cumulative impact.
So we don't do that in EC3, of course. I think I've said this a couple times now. We are solely focused on embodied carbon and stage A1 to A3 right now because that's where a big impact is. But we do have partnerships with folks like Sustainable Minds and others that are really interested in adding our data to something that's looking at more holistic material items, right? So if you're thinking about health impacts when it comes to toxicity and also embodied carbon and also value-based things when it comes to what you're talking about. We won't do that, but our database and our API is free. So if anyone is doing that and wants to add our embodied carbon data to that assessment, we are happy to do that.
That's awesome. So the next one is that they understand that there can be a lot of interpretation of applying PCRs. How normalized and comparable do you think EPDs are? Does this issue lie with changing and making ISO standards more strict or detailed?
Kate, do you want to take that one?
Yeah. So so I would say two things. I'm going to just, the high level, they can be quite imprecise, yet simultaneously, they are the data that we have. And our theory of change is that to get better data, we should start acting on the data that we have rather than waiting for perfection. So if we start acting on data, it becomes more clear of the imperfection. So the ISO standards for EPDs point to the product category rules. That's really the place where the work needs to get done to require more precision. But Stacy, if you keep opening up to where we can edit the EPD would be really great. So this is one of the things that we're identifying is what are the key drivers to this variability between data or uncertainty of how precise it is. And we've identified 5 categories, 4 of whom are really the most dominant ones. So manufacturer specific, it is an industry averaged EPD or one from a specific manufacturer. Is it a single plant or facility, or is it multiple plants strewn across a region? Is it one product or is it many? So is it like all of our carpets from my one plant, or every single carpet broken out by type? And then the one that I'd like to highlight down here is supply chain specific. How much is the data actually related to the supply chain itself versus something upstream in the supply process? So in the EC3 tool, we ideally, all of this variability would be reported in the life cycle assessment and done quantitatively, but that data is not yet being done that way. So we're looking to incentivize the creation of better data by making approximations. So these right now, I don't know if you're a user that can click these on or off, Stacy, in this.
Not right now, not as a pilot user, no.
No, but so in the data, we assess the EPDs, and if they are all manufactured, you know, this is the most precise pretty much that right now you can get the product and plant and manufacturer specific, but we're looking to get the data on supply chain specific data. So that means, for example, if you make a concrete and 90% of the impacts are related to the cement, but the cement impacts are just average cement, as opposed to getting the cement specific data from where you got your actual cement, that would be supply chain specific embodied carbon data. It will be much more precise.
So yeah, I want to add on that, Kate. So what we're seeing right now is we're actually starting to hear that concrete suppliers are seeing this and understanding that the variability is attached to the fact that they have average cement data, and are asking cement suppliers to start to give them plant-specific EPDs to help bring that variability down and turn this into 90% supply chain specific. So we're starting to see that by doing this, we're actually getting a movement and suppliers understanding that they need better data in their EPDs to have less variability reported here. So it's just a positive story that, now that we've been public for 6 months or so, we're starting to hear that happen, and that's really what we did this for. So I just wanted to support what you said, Kate, by an actual kind of positive example.
That's awesome. And then the last question that we have is the LCAs for the product database do include end-of-life impacts, correct? But only as carbon impacts upon disposal or recycling and not toxicity?
So we do not even include end of life. So A1 to A3 for embodied carbon is the extraction emissions and the transportation emissions to a manufacturer and the manufacturing emissions, so cradle to gate. And that's for 2 reasons. First, because that is, again, where the largest impacts are. And second, because just like the next phase, which is the use phase and then the waste phase, those are things that can vary greatly from owner to owner or project to project based on, a churn cycle for updating carpet tiles, or what might happen in the waste stream in 50 years. If I'm putting on my Skanska hat for a minute, the way that we approach it is we're responsible for the building we're demolishing, not the one that's going to be demolished in 50 years. So let's just make sure that we're doing what we can right now with that building to recycle it and not put things into the landfill. So again, EC3 is not looking at the waste stream at all, and there's particular reasons for that. LCA tools do look at it from a carbon and greenhouse gas perspective, and then when it gets into toxicity, I really think that's another layer of how we have to structure projects and what we put into specs and requirements for contractors.
Stacy, it sounds like we've got really smart questioners. I just want to answer one other thing related to that.
Sure.
Within different material categories, there's some really interesting things that happen during use and end of life stage. So if we're trying to talk about biogenic materials like wood and what carbon is stored in them and how much is emitted at the end of life and where to take credit, or with some of the insulations, there's outgassing of greenhouse gas emissions during their use phase. So there are some complexities in there that we're building up towards being able to reflect more appropriately how your choices between things make an impact. But
yeah, another example actually would be when we're getting into some of our pilot categories like resilient flooring or roofing and even carpet tiles. If the use and end of life becomes large enough where we need to have it at least as an option for assessment, we are working with those material category groups to really understand those impacts and see what we can do inside EC3 to at least daylight the fact that they're there. So we are not negating them. We just needed to start somewhere where we had actionable data that we could put out there. And that was with A1 to A3.
It's amazing. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate you giving us like this really amazing deep dive. I won't even call it an overview, but I feel like this is a really good way to find out how to use this, which is amazing. I met Terry, I don't know, Terry, if you even remember this. I met you probably a little over a year ago at the LACSI conference event, and you gave me a really brief walkthrough of what this tool was, and I was absolutely in awe of how powerful this is. So I just want to take a second and thank you guys again for sharing your knowledge.
Of course, I love when we get really good questions where we can actually dig into stuff. So I appreciate those who stayed online and ask those questions too.
Who just said that?
I agree. That was Mary Elise. Is that, I'm not sure if I'm correctly, that did the last question.
Mary Alice. Hi, Mary Alice Pedersen.
Mary Alice.
I'm from the True Zero Waste Advisory Board, and it looks like there's another Pedersen on this talk with my same name spelling. Hi, S. Pedersen. Thank you, you guys. This is really, I'm really glad to hear about all this progress. I love that people are smart people are sitting there doing all this analysis in the background so that we can have these easy to use tools. It's always impressive.
It's so powerful. I am in awe that like this is a thing that is available now. This is like having the power of Google, but for the things that we can actually use it for good with, which is awesome. So with that stuff, I'm sorry that we're over time, guys. I know that we try to be as respectful as possible for that, but the questions were so good. So wrapping it up, we have other webinars available through USGBCLA. This is part of a series, so stay tuned as we have more information coming through for this. We also have more specifically about Title 24 and the Cal Green Building Code updates coming up soon. So this will have some of this like little mixed information as well, so a little relevant. So that's what we have going on in May. We have these upcoming webinars, and then in June we have a few more things going on as well with virtual trainings as well as G-Pro options. If I can go to the next one. If you want to find out anything else about the different educational opportunities we have available, check out our talent portal. We have our updated jobs and everything, everything to do with the Green Building Network we're trying to put onto this one page to give everybody a very good overview of ways that you can increase your knowledge and also other options with the career field. If you have extra time right now, please join us for a call. I'm sure you guys aren't already called out at this point. I feel like we're all a little bit like over zoomed at this place, but virtually join us for a committee. We're doing a lot of really good initiatives at this point in time that are starting up this year. And with all of the kind of like efforts that we can use, we're putting together some really big things. So if there's anything that is of interest to you, just please feel free to join in for the next call and get involved, and that is how you join. Well, this graphic did not show up, unfortunately. Oh, there it goes. So we have MGBCE coming up in August. I'm sorry. I wasn't muted. Oh no, please join in. I don't like sitting talking to the void by myself. So please share with me. So we have MGBCE coming up in August, and it is going to be virtually available. So we're trying to push forward as much content as possible so that people will have exhibitors that they can still interact with. At this point in time, we're not sure if in-person is even going to be an option, but we should know more by the end of the week, hopefully. But we are trying to make everything available virtually at this point. So we're hoping that this will be a new and exciting venture for us to kind of go in this field, and maybe this will broaden our audience even more so we can get out this information to the masses. So please join us for that. And thank you to all of our sponsors who make content like this possible. So I just wanted to do a quick thank you for that. And we hope to see you guys all for the next one. And again, thank you so much for joining. We appreciate it. And thank you, Kate, Stacy, and Terry for bringing all this. Yes, claps. Have a good one. Thank you guys so much.
Great to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks.